everybody. Welcome to the Common Knowledge Podcast, a podcast about improving your skills in Magic, particularly within the Pauper format. I'm your host, Brandon Clark, and joined with me, as always, the beautiful Sean Stokes.
Yep, I go by Lobert Online, and here for some Pauper.
Pauper power. Giving it to the people. The Pauper people need their Pauper power. For Pauper. All right, I'm done. Okay, hey, before we start the show, let's give a quick shout out to our sponsor, puremtgo.com. Check them out for articles and other MTG related podcasts. You can find deck lists. You can buy cards, sell cards, trade cards, all that good stuff.
MTGO cards specifically. I don't know if they have.
Sorry, yeah. I don't know if you can do. I don't think you can do paper cards on puremtgo.com.
No, sorry.
Probably all the digital stuff. Anyway, so yeah, that's a great place to go to purchase all your Pauper Power picks. Yeah. All right, moving on. So, like the show, you can support us on our Patreon, patreon.com/common knowledge. We really love doing this for you guys, and your contributions only help make this show better. It allows us to do things that we couldn't do with just our own resources, and we appreciate everything that you guys put into it, because honestly, without listeners, no show.
Yeah, and it really helps justify spending all the study time and the recording time. And I'll take this last point. We are on the Constructed Criticism Network. Some of the other podcasts are Constructed Criticism, of course, and Limited Time Only.
Yeah, so check those out. Those are our sister podcasts. Both hosted by Spencer Howland, so you get some great content when you tune in.
I think
but let's jump into...
I think with Constructed Criticism, it's a little bit generous to call us its sister. I think it's more of our mommy.
Yeah. I guess both of them probably are our mommy and daddy podcasts. Not really the sister. We're kind of like the
babby.
Yeah. I don't know. I was going to say the ginger stepchild of the group, but that's probably insulting, so I didn't say it. But then I said it anyway. So
it's offensive to ginger stepchildren.
I'm sorry. I don't want to be offensive, but I couldn't think of a better way to describe what we are.
You've angered the whole Weasley clan. They're going to Vada Kedavra you.
Yeah, I think we're probably the Ron Weasley of this group, and Constructed Criticism is definitely Bill Weasley, and Limited Time Only is probably Charlie. And let's face it, none of us are Percy because he's the worst. I wish Voldemort killed Percy, but anyway, I digress. Hey! Card of the week. We have a card of the week for you guys.
What's the card?
Sean, what's our card of the week?
Oh, you're gonna ask me? It's Pulse of Marasa.
Wow, what is that?
Pulse of Marasa is a 3-mana instant spell. It's 2 generic and a green to play. It targets a land or a creature from your graveyard, from any player's graveyard, actually, and it gains you 6 life, and it returns that said land or creature to your hand.
So I actually didn't know that it could target any graveyard.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a reason you would ever want to
just
return something?
They shut down your graveyard. You're looking at burn and you might be eyeing, maybe it wouldn't be so bad if they had that creature back in their hand. The 6 life is important. I've done it before.
Oh, just so you can gain the 6 life?
Yes.
Sure. What about, like, I don't know, this is a weird thought, like dredge decks? Like if they're trying to dredge, is there ever an application where you're just like, put your Sinkweed back in your hand, you don't get a dredge?
No, I think you're really going for the value. of like
Okay.
getting a card back in your hand most of the time.
Okay. Yeah, that was just my. I didn't think there was ever like a real good time you'd want to target someone else's graveyard, but I guess I just didn't realize that you could until you said that, and then I was kind of like, well, is there an application for this? Maybe, maybe not, probably not.
Yeah,
So
I wish it could target more than just creatures and lands. It's a little bit limiting. Like I wish it could do like
you
enchantments and
just
artifacts or something, but that's not very
yeah,
green, except for maybe the enchantments part.
that's also like probably too strong, maybe.
Yeah, and the 6 life is already it's giant. 6 is a lot of life.
Yeah, I mean this card's already powerful. So where does this card see a lot of its play within the format? What decks are taking advantage of this?
Dominantly Tron. Tron runs this main deck a lot of the time because it has some great combos with Mnemonic Wall. You can have a wall out there, block with the wall, let it die, get it back to your hand, and the Mnemonic Wall will get back your Pulse of Marasa again. And so you kind of have this weird loop of blocking for 4 and gaining 6 life every turn. And you can do that at instant speed, which is like the instant is so big on this card. It's fantastic.
Yeah, so it's really a what 8 mana combo though,
Yeah, but for
right?
Tron, that's nothing.
That's true. For Tron, that's just pocket
Yeah, it's like
change.
3 lands.
It's literally like 3 lands. Well, 3 lands and like a filter effect because we need green mana.
Sure.
Boom, 4 lands. Gotcha.
It also sees some play in Slivers, which is a fringe deck in the sideboard, and then also in the sideboard of elves occasionally. So that like it's mostly just for like burn. Whenever they're not playing the something rain, where you gain life for each creature on the battlefield. I've seen them run Pulse of Marasa. It's uncommon though. I want to say it's like 1 out of every 20 something decks.
Yeah. Um, Another cool function of this card is kind of how it turns your graveyard into almost a toolbox, where you now not only have access to the spells or the cards in your hand, the creatures in your hand, but with Pulse Marauder, kind of by extension, you have access to those things in your graveyard.
Yeah, it's all of a sudden just dealing with something doesn't mean you've actually dealt with it. Like it could come back, and then if they can recur that Pulse of Marasa somehow, like you're back to square one. It can really bite you, and I would look out for it since we don't have I think any relevant prevention of life gain effects. So that's something you're gonna have to play around, especially if you're playing burn.
Yeah. Anyway, well, so that's Pulse of Marasa. Kind of a newer card in the format. Well, I don't know. Battle for Zendikar, whatever set it was. I think it was the second set in Battle for Zendikar.
Eh,
But that set's been out for a little while. But I think it's only been, I don't know, maybe within the last 6 or so months that we've really started seeing this card.
as soon as it was printed, it saw play, but compared to the
What it
pauper
sees now.
format, compared to the pauper format, it's a young card, and it pretty much started pushing out the need to play things like Fangren Marauder in Tron, and then these new brews popped up.
Okay. Well, cool. Yeah. So Pulsar Marasa, it's a sweet card. If you're interested in playing with it, I'd say give Tron a spin.
Yeah.
That's probably the most competitive outlet for it. The best deck, I think, that utilizes it. So, all right. Well, let's move right along then to the main topic of today's show. We're doing another deep dive in. We want to try to get onto a regular schedule to make things more consistent, better for you listeners. So twice a month, we're going to do a deep dive in where we just go really in depth on a single topic, whether it's a card, a deck list, an archetype, whatever. And this week, we're going to go with Affinity. the deck Affinity, and we're gonna go down. We're gonna try to get as deep as we can on this for you guys. So the hope is, if you want to ever sleeve this deck up, play with it, build it on online. Hopefully, this is a good primer for you. And if you want to play against it, if you want to know how to beat this deck, hopefully we can provide some insights there too. So let's just kind of get in. Let's just start. Let's just talk about what is Affinity. What is this deck, Sean?
It's a deck that uses the artifact lands to play powerful spells, and it just has all kinds of synergies with that. It's basically like it's like any other robots deck. It's aggro-y. This version has a combo, which gives it like all of this play where like you can control the deck and then all of a sudden you just lose. Um, do you want to get into? Do you have anything to add about just the deck before we get into the battle plan?
No. Let's kind of get into it. What is the focus of this deck?
So the focus is to pretty much play undercosted 4/4s and ATOG. That's pretty much it, and all everything else is like a means to do that. Um, the 4/4s pretty much always outclass your opponent's creatures, and then you just beat down. You can vomit them onto the battlefield much quicker than a normal deck could. And then, of course, you're playing ATOG, which, if you're not familiar with ATOG, it's 1 and a red for a 1/2 that you can sacrifice an artifact. It gets +2/+2 until end of turn. And that card is great. It turns all of your lands into pump spells to just save your ATOG, and then eventually you sack everything and your ATOG is just ginormous.
And then you attack with this ATOG and it gets chump blocked. Right?
Not if you know how to play Affinity.
Yeah. So one of the other cool things that I really like about Affinity is that it has 16 damage worth of direct burn spells in the deck, right?
Yeah,
4 Galvanic Blasts.
Not counting Fling.
Oh, and I guess not counting the Fling too. So I mean, Galvanic Blast just feels like it's on a different level than a card like Lightning Bolt, and Lightning Bolt is already absurdly powerful. But Galvanic Blast is giving us an extra point of damage for the exact same mana cost. Like, that rate is huge. And with, the caveat of, hey, you have to have Metalcraft, but, when we're playing Affinity, Metalcraft isn't hard.
Yeah, you basically need 3 permanents.
And so it's just like, I don't know, you've just got to respect the fact that if you get to 12, you could just be dead.
Yeah.
Like, it's not out there for them to, like, just blast you 3 times.
Yeah, and that also, it has a whole... there's just so many different plays of, like, you can prioritize using your burn spells to clear a path for your other 4/4s, and then... I said other 4/4s as if Galvanic Blast was a 4/4, but you can clear the way, and then they can get in. So it turns that 4 damage into a repeatable 4 damage in a lot of ways. And so you can target their creatures. You can do all kinds of crazy stuff with this deck. I think the synergies are just amazing, and that's why it fluctuates from... It's been the number 1 deck, and then of course the format adjusts, and then it goes up and down. I think right now we're at a low, so it might be a good time to surprise everyone with an Affinity deck.
Yeah, maybe. But I do really like that this deck can be super explosive, vomit its hand onto the table, but it can also take a slower, more controlling role, use its burn spells to remove problematic creatures, and then just make big mid-range threats in the form of the Mer Enforcer and stuff, and even the new one, the Gear Seeker Serpent.
Mm.
You know, so
Yeah.
it attacks on a lot of different angles.
Uh, so are we ready to get into the individual cards in the deck?
Yeah, let's do that. Let's start with the mana base. So what kind of lands is this deck playing? Is it a I guess we'll talk about that. We'll talk about the lands and we'll talk about sort of what colors this mana base supports.
So interestingly enough, the mana base is a 3-color mana base. If you're just counting the land, we'll get to the fixing in a minute that allows the deck to just do all kinds of crazy stuff, like almost whatever it wants. But the most common number of lands in this deck is 16, and all of them are artifact lands. If they do run 17, it's another artifact land. So the mana base is made up of 4 Darksteel Citadel, which I want to say it's so important because it prevents your mana base from being completely wiped out a lot of the time. The Indestructible is huge on that card. And then we have 4 Great Furnace, which is the red artifact land, 4 Seed of the Sonid, the blue artifact land, and then 4 Tree Tails, which is the green artifact land. And then if you're going to add a 17th land, it's either a one of Vault of Whispers or a one of Tree of Tails. So either black or white, depending on your specific build.
Okay. So kind of looking at the dynamic of this mana base, it's obvious that we want all the artifact lands that we can have. We don't want to play anything that's not an artifact land. But how important is the color combination? Like all your spells, like you have a lot of colored spells, but like
I want to say it's not super important.
Are the 12 that you have had listed out, the Great Furnace, the Seat of Synod, and the Tree of Tails, are those just the default best 3 that you can play and you just want to max out on all of those?
Absolutely. Just based on what you need to cast most often. The Tree of Tails is pretty much in there for the Carapace Forger.
Mm-hmm.
And
that is the 1/2 that is not an artifact, but if you have metal crap or the 1 in a green is what I meant to say. I don't know where I came up with 1/2, but it's 1 in a green for a 2/2 that if you have metal crap becomes a 4/4.
Yeah.
Right? Yep. Okay.
And it's like that's pretty much why the green is in there. Otherwise, like there's really no white spells in the deck. There's no black spells in the deck. So like the Great Furnace and the Seed of the Sonid are really the best colors to have, like the blue and the red. But like your off color is green, and it's just like you get maxed out on that because you don't need the other colors at all in your main deck.
Sure. Okay. Cool. Well, let's talk a bit about the creature base of this deck. So typically we've got 4 Atogs, 4 of the Carapace Forger, 4 Frogmite, 4 Myr Enforcer, and some number ranging 0 to 3 of the Gear Seeker Serpent.
Yeah, and the Gear Seeker Serpent, I want to say the most common number is 2. And that's just because blue is kind of difficult for the deck. And if we haven't said what Gear Seeker is, it's a 5/6 that it costs 5 and 2 blue mana, and it costs less for each artifact you control. So it basically has affinity for artifacts, but they were too scared to actually put that on enough cards in Kaladesh to actually give it that. But we got 1, and it instantly became playable.
Yeah, it's a good one.
But then it has this semi-irrelevant ability. It would be good without it, but it has it, and so it's pretty good. You can pay, I think it's 6 mana. 1 second. It is 6 mana, 5 and a blue, and it says Gearseeker Serpent can't be blocked this turn. 6 isn't an unreasonable amount of land to hit, especially a little bit later in the game when you might have some Springleaf Drums helping you out. I love the Gearseeker Serpent builds. It's fantastic with all of your. It's great with Fling and Teamer Battle Rage, even though you want to be using those cards on your ATOG. It's a good backup. Like 5 power is a lot. It can profitably battle a Gurmag Angler. It's just huge. And then
Yeah.
the other 2 creatures that we skipped over a little bit, but they're kind of the namesake of the card or of the deck. They are Frogmite and Mirror Enforcer. Frogmite is a 2/2 for 4 mana that has affinity for artifacts, so it costs 1 less for each artifact you have. And then Mirror Enforcer's a 4/4 for 7 mana with affinity for artifacts.
So this is like what I like about the Pauper deck is this is like an actual pure affinity deck. You know, it's not like the modern version of the deck, which is like devolved into maybe 1-2 copies of Thoughtcast. This deck plays like a full 12 to 15 cards that actually say affinity on them. I think that's cool. I think that's fun.
Yeah, definitely. I think what's super notable about this creature base is that the Frogmites and Mirror Enforcers can be free, and so when you're playing the deck or playing against the deck, it's important to note that the deck can have this turn where you just all of a sudden lay down 4 creatures in one turn, just 3 Mirror Enforcers and maybe like a Frogmite. And if you're not careful, like they'll just run you over with that, because that's unless you're post board, that's pretty impossible to deal with in a reasonable amount of time.
Yeah, I would say that would be pretty terrifying.
And like I think the Carapace Forger and the ATOG are extra great because they're not artifacts actually. The deck is like super centralized on pretty much every card being an artifact, and then
Right.
they're your payoffs. Forger is just this 2 mana 4/4 that can get super out of control, and then ATOG, of course, just if it's unblocked, you can just die even without another spell.
Right, and that's also nice too because, and we'll get into this later with sideboarding and everything, but having those 2 big payoff spells not be artifacts means that your opponent has to really go. It's just kind of a different dynamic when they sideboard because they've got to respect the fact that if they take out all their, whatever removal spells just to bring in all their Mox Monkeys and Ancient Grudges and everything, they could just die to ATOG or Carapace Forger.
Yeah, and if you're playing red, ATOG just becomes this super resilient threat of, like, they can just sack their land, and when you're playing against the deck, a lot of the time you just want to do that anyway. Like if you have a firebolt or a lightning bolt or something, just end step pointed at it so that they have to get rid of one of their artifacts, so that eventually, like, they're not going to just have this turn with where they can sack 20 of them, or not 20 of them, 20 points of damage worth of them. That number's reduced and they have to work for it a little bit harder.
Yeah. It also kind of plays into like when you need to kill their stuff. Like you can't kill them in combat if there's an ATOG, and you can't try to kill them when there's an ATOG and 2 open mana. So it's really, ATOG really just, it adds a whole nother level of reach, and I almost want to say virtual card advantage to the deck.
Yeah.
Where it just makes use of all these otherwise dead cards, but then it also does such a great job of blanking a lot of what your opponent has to interact with you.
Yeah, and I think it's super important that all of the creatures can be played for 2 mana or less, if need be, because you are a 16 land deck and you're not guaranteed to get that many. I want to say a lot of the time, Affinity actually just dies to mulliganing because it never found land 1 and 2. Are we ready to get into the non-creature spells?
Yeah, let's talk about them.
So the first one is, I was on the fence about putting this in the creature spells. It is Flare Husk. Do you have any? Well, I'll explain what Flare Husk does, and then I'll ask you if you have any like thoughts on it. So Flare Husk is a 1 mana artifact. It's an equipment with a living weapon. So it comes into play with a germ token. So it's essentially your 1 mana 1/1. It's your 1 drop, and then it has then it gives the creature +1/+1, and it has equip of 2. Thoughts?
This card is good. That's my thought. No. I don't know. It's just it's great because it's a creature. So you can use it for all the things you use creatures for, or whatever. But then once that creature's gone, this sticks around and makes your other creatures bigger, scarier. So it kind of goes back to what I was saying about ATOG, how ATOG gives kind of use to otherwise dead cards. Flare Husk is the same way because it's this little 1/1 which can have its uses. But then you get to a point in the game where a 1/1's just going to be kind of outclassed, not going to do much more than like chump block maybe. And that's when you can put the Flare Husk under one of your bigger creatures. And, making one of your 4/4s into a 5/5 to trade up with a Gurmag Angler, or to battle through opposing 4/4s, I think is just adds a lot of mobility and extra reach and power to the deck.
Yeah, it puts those 4/4s out of Galvanic Blast range, and then uh, I think one of the most relevant things it does is it makes Frogmite a 3/3 so that it can get through Augur of Bolas, which is huge. Like that's turning your 2/2 from doing 0 damage to doing 3 damage just because of a Flare Husk. That's huge for your 1 drop. I mean, you have to pay an extra 2 to put it on that Frogmite, but when a lot of the time you're not paying for your spells anymore, you have this spare mana, and Flare Husk is just this great mana sink of just you equip it, you attack with it, and then you equip it to something else, and it just makes everything harder for you. I think the one last thing I would want to say about Flare Husk is I think its most common purpose is to tap it to Springleaf Drum. It comes down on turn 1, and then it makes your Springleaf Drum free, and maybe even fixes your mana because of that. And it's this really low, what's the word I'm looking for? It's a low value threat, but when someone's faced with the decision of, oh, they have a Springleaf Drum, this is going to be their only creature, I have to actually interact with this, and you can't wait for it to be on the board because priority, and they can tap it anyway and stuff like that. It becomes this weird question, and that's, I think, extra good.
Yeah.
And that being said, you don't really want to run, I think, more than 2, but 3. The third one pops up in a few deck lists. I've never seen 4 though.
I don't know that I've ever seen 4 either. It's typically like 2 or 3, but I don't know. Is 4 the wrong number?
I think it is.
Is that just too many?
There's other better cards that could be taking up that deck slot. You're already pretty strapped for deck slots as it is.
Okay. All right. Well, let's kind of move along. Let's jump ahead to some of the other spells in the group, the deck list. I don't know why I said group.
The flock.
So we've got 4 Galvanic Blasts, 4 Thought Casts, a Fling, and then some number ranging between 0 and 2 copies of Metallic Rebuke.
And yeah, Metallic Rebuke is that 3 mana. Uh, it's 2 and a blue for. It's a counter spell. It's a mana leak. They have to pay 3, but it also has improvise.
Oh, so your artifacts can help you cast this spell.
Right. That's another
Wow.
great use for Flayer Husk. It never taps. Uh, like even if you tap it to Springleaf Drum,
Yeah, well,
the
because the creature is the one's
yeah.
tapping, not the player husk itself.
So it's always just sitting there waiting to be tapped by a Metallic Rebuke. So
Wow, that's like double mana all the way.
yeah, this deck is just all about cheating mana, which I love.
Yeah,
It does make
and
for
like
some
even
sequencing, some
yeah,
tough
the
sequencing.
the what?
It does make for some tough sequencing of like you got to remember that playing like your Springleaf Drum is actually mana neutral when it comes to casting a uh, an affinity creature. So like a lot of the time you want to throw it in your 1 drop and then you're just like okay, Frogmite's free, and then maybe you can do something else with that Frogmite.
Hmm. Yeah.
So other than that, we have Thoughtcast, which is a 5 cost draw 2, and you're like, is this as good as Gush? Pretty much.
I think it might be better than Gush. I mean,
It's
when you think
apples
of
and
the
oranges.
context of the Affinity deck, like you're often casting it for 1 mana, where Gush you cast for 0 mana, but I don't know, having to bounce the 2 lands back, I think is more of a drawback than just having to put powerful artifacts in your deck.
Yeah, and this Thoughtcast a lot of the time will just unmulligan you. I feel like, or if you haven't mulliganed, just put you that much further ahead. Um, it, People almost never counter the Thoughtcast, so you pretty much always get the cards.
Thoughtcast is 4 and a blue.
Yes.
Okay. For some reason, I thought you said 5 and a blue.
Oh, did I? It's 5 total.
Yeah, yeah, maybe that's what you said, but
Most of the
four and a
time, it
blue.
is 1 blue
So I mean,
though.
it's not like outrageous to mulligan to 5 and have a land that's like Flare has Springleaf Drum, 2 lands, and you make Thoughtcast on turn 2, and like all of a sudden you're back up to where you were. Like you said, you've unmulliganed yourself. Like
Yeah, with a board state.
yeah.
Uh,
And then the last spells in our repertoire are sort of the burn, and these are sort of what give the deck reach. And that's the 4 copies of Galvanic Blast that we talked about earlier, and then the 1 copy of Fling.
um, yeah, and I think when you talk about Fling, you also have to talk about the Teamer Battle Rage, because you used to run 1 to 2 Flings, and then they printed Teamer Battle Rage, and now we just run 1 and 1 because Teamer Battle Rage is just better against I think the field because so much of it is blue and you're not afraid to just go all out as much. Like just getting a creature, you have to sack half as many artifacts to get lethal, and then
Yeah.
like it doesn't just win out of nowhere. You have to. It gives them options of like blocking in combat and weird things like that. But so often, Teamer Battle Rage just becomes like just lethal even on your 4/4s, and just that the trample means that 2 damage is going to roll over and then 4 more is going to hit them. That card's just great. It doesn't have the just win out of nowhere aspect of Fling, but I think it's comparable.
Okay. And so now the last sort of set cards, I feel like these are all sort of the spells that are just set in stone. When you make an affinity deck, you start it, with 30 or whatever cards, and that's the filtering artifacts. So prophetic prisms, springleaf drum, and chromatic star. And these are just like we talked about. These are just the mana filter land or artifacts, help fix your mana. And they kind of allow the deck to really be a 5-color deck more than just like a 3-color deck.
Yeah, and half of them draw you a card anyway, and they just make this deck so consistent. The Chromatic Star can basically be kind of like a Llanowar elf at the start of the game, where you lay it down turn 1, and then turn 2, it helps play your Frogmite or something like that before you sack it. And so it's ramped you, and then it'll fix your colors. And one cool trick about Chromatic Star that I didn't know for a long time is if you sequence it correctly, sorry, I just noticed whenever you mute yourself, it puts an M in the document.
That's because I had my cursor in the document, and then I was hitting M to mute, and it wouldn't mute, and then I had to go over and be like, I gotta click back in.
Okay. Anyway, so with Chromatic Star, the Chromatic Star can both count towards Affinity and help fix the mana for your spell, which feels broken to me because I feel like you should have to do one than the other, but that's the way it works. And so remember that it works that way, so that if you have that Thoughtcast in your hand and you have to get your blue off of your Chromatic Star, you can use that blue, have it count towards Affinity, and you've paid 1 blue and drawn 3 cards. It feels a lot like Ancestral Vision. It's not instant, but we're in Pauper.
I mean, come on, Treasure Cruise was banned.
Yeah.
So anyway, now the last spells, they make appearances, but it's not always there. You know, a lot of deck lists don't play these cards, but we've got Perilous Research on the list and Ichor Wellspring. Ichor Wellspring kind of fills a role similar to Chromatic Star. It's 1 mana more, right? But it replaces itself
When it enters.
Right? Or is it when it dies?
Both.
It's both.
So when it enters, you draw a card, and when it leaves, you draw a card. Well, it has to die to draw the card.
Right. But again, it's an artifact. So
yeah, and it's super easy to sack.
It has
that
a
thing.
return on mana, and it replaces itself. So
yeah, and Perilous Research goes hand in hand with builds that play Ichor Wellspring, just to have like this great card advantage engine. And Perilous Research, if you don't know what it does, it's a 2 mana blue spell, one colorless and a blue, that when you cast it, you draw 2 cards, and then you get to choose whether or not, which permanent you sacrifice. You do have to sacrifice a permanent, but it's after you've drawn the cards, and it's not an additional casting cost, which is great. So you can cast Perilous Research, sack that Ichor Wellspring at instant speed, and then you've just drawn 3 cards.
Yeah.
So the other there's one honorable mention that I wanted to bring up. It's super rare, but it sees play. It's Somber Hoverguard, and it's another affinity creature. It has flying. It's a 3/2, and it has affinity for artifacts. It's a 6-drop. So if you have 5 artifacts, it's basically a Delver of Secrets. So that's basically most lists. It's just those same 16 or more creatures, and it just has all these crazy good synergies where everything costs less. I love it. It's where I started out in Pauper.
It's where you started out in most formats, right?
Every format, really. Yes.
Artifacts in all formats. I don't know if you could call Mud an affinity deck. I don't know. Maybe you could. It's kind of the same thing, right? Make fast mana, play big, stupid things.
Yeah, it's not affinity because it's not so much aggro. But Mud's a different goat. So then there are a couple of variants of the deck. Um, One of them uses Disciple of the Vault. It's just the one black mana for a 1/1 that whenever an artifact goes from play into the graveyard, your opponent takes a damage. And that does count your opponent's artifacts as well. But it's mostly there because it makes your it makes your what's it called? It makes your ATOG do 3 damage every time you sack an artifact, and you don't necessarily even have to try to get it to work. It'll just start working. It's even banned in Modern because it's great. And then the other variant sometimes runs Ariok Sunchaser.
I don't even know what this card is, actually.
It's one generic and a white for a 1/1 that when you have Metalcraft, it gains +2/+2 in flying, so it's a 3/3 flyer. And I think a lot of the time those builds run Bone Splitter. But I don't think either of those versions are my favorite. I like just the Gearseeker Serpent build.
Yeah, I feel like that just sounds more consistent. It just feels like those versions of the deck, the Gearseeker Serpent versions, are just more on plan and more, I guess, focused, streamlined on what they're trying to do. It's just a very straightforward, this is what my deck wants to do, and it's going to do it better than most other decks do.
And I think the other versions are trying to be a little bit too cute.
Yeah, I think that's probably what I was trying to say, summed up into a quick sentence.
A bite-sized piece just to eat it. Okay. Are you ready to move on to the sideboard? Or sideboarding? Okay. So, with the... Okay. With the sideboard, first I want to cover what to take out of the deck. First is Fling, I think, is the first card you want to look at when you're trying to decide what to take out of the deck. Basically, I would take this out against any deck that has Counterspell, just because 2-for-1ing yourself, because it has that additional cost of sacrificing a creature, it's just too high. Do you have anything to add to just taking? I think that's super basic, but do you have anything to take out of, or anything to add to taking Fling out of your deck? I think that's pretty simple. You're still muted.
Okay, I'm unmuted now. I think that's like just pretty straightforward. You don't want to ever 2-for-1 yourself against an opponent who can just go blue counterspell, get 2 of your cards. I think that just feels really bad.
The next card I would look at with taking out of your deck is Galvanic Blast. And I would basically take this out against every non-creature deck. It's a pretty easy card to take out. I know it gives you reach, but if it's not taking out creatures, that's pretty much what it's for. It's there because you need the option to kill creatures. If Pauper was a format where you didn't have to worry about creatures just killing you if you didn't interact with them, I don't think we would run Galvanic Blast. So I think some of the decks you want to take this out against is Boggles, since it can't hit the creatures. Tron, because we don't really care. We're just trying to go faster. Blue-Black Teachings, because it doesn't line up well with Anglers if they play them, and they don't have any other creatures. If they do run any, it's like Augur of Bolas, and we don't care. We just run that thing over. And then, interestingly enough, I've been looking at some articles and some primers, and a lot of people say take it out against Kuldethaboros.
Okay.
Their creatures aren't high value enough that
Right.
you
I mean,
care about them.
the only one that you really care about killing is the I'm the Monarch guy and like maybe Seeker of the Way if they have that. Otherwise, it's just a bunch of 1/1s from Battle Screech and stuff.
Yeah, I think the Seeker of the Way maybe gives credence to that. Maybe think about it a little bit more.
Yeah, if they have Seeker of the Way, maybe you do, just because the life gain on him on Seeker
Yeah,
could make a race difficult. So maybe you need you need to weigh it versus play draw. If you're on the play, maybe you don't need it, and if you're on the draw and you need to get out ahead of a Seeker of the Way,
yeah.
maybe you do.
With their Monarch creature, I don't think you care about that creature either. Like it's a wall, and that's about it.
I just I just lost you completely with your audio. I didn't hear anything you just said.
Oh, I'll say it again. I don't think the Monarch.
I still can't hear you. Is it my end?
Yeah, it's your end. Technical issues. Gonna keep talking.
My volume is up.
1 second.
I'm all plugged in.
Test. Testing. I can.
I don't hear a thing you're saying.
You. Test.
Okay, figured it out.
Okay.
We're gonna have to go through and just edit all this crap out,
Okay.
or keep it in, because we lazy.
Well, we'll see. If I have access to the audio, I'll go ahead and do that. If not, we'll just if you have a time, if you can mark the timestamp, we can edit it out that way.
How do I do that? My thing doesn't show a timer
Oh my gosh.
because I'm not the one streaming it.
Yeah, mine either.
Oh well.
Okay. Anyway,
Somewhere around the 45-minute mark.
so what I was saying over and over before you cut out was I don't think it's worth
Before
it.
you cut out.
Shh. Before you left the conversation.
Technical difficulties.
I don't think keeping it in to kill their monarch creature, Palace Sentinels, is worth it since it's basically a 2/4 wall. It lines up
Right.
really well, so you can like kill it, and you're like, I don't have to like
Yeah.
block with a 4/4
like-
or anything, or attack with a 4/4. But
And I think that was kind of my point, was that like the best target for it besides the Seeker is the Monarch guy, and he's not even really something I want to waste a Galvanic Blast on because I can just punch through it with a Mirror Enforcer. You know?
yeah. So I think we're running low on time, so I think I'm gonna speed this up a little bit. So for fast/aggro decks, if you're running the Perilous Research / Ichor Wellspring plan, take those cards out of your deck. They're too slow. And if you're not running those, I would say look at your copies of Prophetic Prism 3 through 4 if you're running them, and Gearseeker Serpent since they're also slow. And that's pretty much how I would sideboard most of the time. You're going to be looking at the same couple of cards to take out of your deck. So I'm gonna do you want to cover the core cards of the sideboard, or do you want me to?
Yeah, I can do that. So this is just a list that Sean has compiled for us, just kind of looking at all the sideboards and what the most common occurring cards are. The first ones are Electrickery, typically 2 to 3. Some copies of Kark Clan Shaman, 2 to 3 copies of Feed the Clan, 2 to 3 copies of Dispel, 2 Relic of Progenitists, 1 to 3 copies of Ancient Grudge.
Yeah, I looked at all of the deck lists for like the past, I want to say 2 months, and just the cards that kept on reoccurring. I made this deck list. Like Kark Clan Shaman, I want to say you usually see you see multiple Electrickeries. The Feed the Clan, I've seen people debate against because they don't think burn is good, but it is actually good. Um, and then I think Dispel is the best counterspell to protect your combo.
Which spell?
Dispel.
Oh,
And
that's a
then
good one.
Relic of Progenitus is usually for Tron, and then Ancient Grudge is for the Mirror. And then we have these other. I've organized them into category, and people run varying amounts of these, and they come in and out of sideboards altogether. The first archetype is Protection. You can run both Pyroblast and Hydroblast. I think Hydroblast is the worst card, and I don't think it belongs in the sideboard, but people do play it. And then Pyroblast is great because it counters blue spells. Then some people run Spell Pierce, but that is, I think, pretty much just worse than Dispel.
Which spell?
Is that the only thing you're gonna add?
um, no, yeah. I mean, I think they pretty much covered it. I think it's fairly intuitive, and it's also probably very meta dependent too, and what you're expecting to play against. What split of Pyroblast, Hydroblast, Spell Pierces you want?
Mm-hmm.
I would think that I don't know, a very burn heavy meta game. I would want extra copies of Spell Pierce, just because that card has utility against burn as well as other decks, and you don't want to just max out on Hydroblasts.
Yeah. And yeah, I really don't like Hydroblast in this. I don't really know why you care about red spells. Like, if you're gonna care about red spells, play Ancient Grudge, I guess, or not Ancient Grudge. Feed the Clan. Other
and
than
just
that,
gain
yeah,
lives.
yeah, because that's what you're doing it most of the time. The only card that I would really fear
Yeah.
is Swirling Sandstorm, enough to bring in Hydroblast. But I think that's a lot to allocate a whole card out of your sideboard for. So up next we have our artifact removal package. You can run 1 to 2 Gorilla Shaman for the mirror, and that's of course like the
The
card
Mox
worth.
Monkey.
Yeah, Mox Monkey. It it's just you're afraid of it the whole time, and I love running it in my Affinity sideboard. It's just so powerful. The deck struggles on land anyway. Play that Gorilla Shaman, and you've won most of the time. And then some people run Natural State just as a really cheap alternative to Ancient Grudge. It doesn't have that buyback, but I think the logic is that you're just trying to play it so early that they can never get off the ground. And that is actually it's a pretty popular choice, is that Natural State is.
Yeah.
Anything to add
I
to
do
the
like Natural
artifacts?
State.
Yeah.
No.
Okay.
I think those are pretty straightforward.
So then
Yeah.
we move on to the enchantment removal. And I almost put Serene Heart in with the core cards because it's pretty up there in the frequency of the deck. And it takes that Boggles matchup, which is like a draw dependent, like dice roll dependent almost match.
Yeah.
And it's just like an I win button. Like, you play Serene Heart and you win. And your other two options are Ray of Revelation and Standard Bearer, which are both white spells. You don't have any white lands in your deck. So I think they're ambitious. I've seen Ray of Revelation do great work against things like we called it Kuldotha Boros earlier. It's Boros Monarch. Because they run those what are they called? Journey to Nowhere, Oblivion Ring, and you can get your creatures back, which is great. And Serene Heart doesn't hit them since they're not auras.
Yeah.
But
It's just gotta be local enchantments.
And then Standard Bearer, I think it's one of the best sideboard cards in Pauper, but I think it's stretching it a little bit. I don't know if it's worth forcing yourself to get a mana fixer for.
Yeah, and it's really off plan too.
Yeah.
What I kind of like about, I don't know, Ray of Revelation more so and Serene Heart is they're more efficient. They're a lot easier to cast, which kind of helps keep you on plan, you know. Whereas the standard bearer, he's what, 3 mana, 4 mana,
Two.
2 mana.
Yeah.
What am I thinking of? Oh, I'm thinking of Coalition Honor Guard,
What is
which
that
is
card?
it's just a strictly worse standard bearer
Oh,
because
wait.
it's 4 mana.
Oh, yeah, it's the 4 mana 2/4 with the same ability.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking of. So I don't know. Never mind. Standard bearer is great.
It's
The
it's
2 mana.
it's
It's
really
two
good,
mana.
but I think
Pretty
Serene
good.
Heart does the job better. It You can let them resolve their enchantments and then catch back up instead of having to get that out
Right.
early.
Yeah, you don't have to. You're not so reliant on playing standard bearer on turn two every single game
Hmm.
that you could top deck the Serene Heart or the Ray of Revelation and get back into a game. Whereas if you top deck the standard bearer and they've already got a big old boggle, you dead, kid.
Yeah, it does have that added bonus of you can bring it in some weird matchups where they're going to be pointing a lot of removal at your creatures. But I don't think that's worth it all. I think you have enough slots, or sideboard slots, that you don't have to do that.
Yeah, I agree.
So you're ready to move on to how to beat Affinity?
Yeah. How do you beat this deck? I don't
Okay,
want to play this deck. No, sir, not me. But I want to beat it.
I think this is where almost everyone is going to be. I think this is the most important part because the majority of the people can't play the one deck. In fact, the majority of the people are probably going to be playing Delver, but whatever.
Yeah. So tell me how to beat this deck when I'm playing Delver.
Okay, so some important turns are, and some important objectives that they're trying to get to is if they can hit a higher affinity count, mostly number 4 and number 7, their frogmites become free, and they can actually cast those mirror enforcers. You want to make them use resources to cast those frogmites, and you want to keep them off of mirror enforcer completely. It is kind of a tricky game of knowing when to go for the actually counter like the prophetic prism to keep them off of affinity rather than saving your counter spell for the actual mirror enforcer. And I think that's just kind of a judgment call on how far are you ahead? Can you keep this far ahead? And is them losing momentum that important? So usually early in the game that's important, and then as they get more artifacts, it becomes less important. Um, and it's really difficult. I think after board it becomes a lot easier to interact with them and keeping them off of those things, but
Mhm.
pre-board sometimes using that removal on a creature or preventing them from having something to tap for Springleaf Drum, that's super important so that they just can't play 3/4/4s in one turn with Mirror Enforcer.
Yeah. And that kind of ties into our next point, which is to have something for ATOG and Fling. Um, if you're kind of keeping them off artifacts, it makes ATOG worse down the line.
Mm-hmm.
But then also just be cognizant of this other attack plan that the deck has, where all of a sudden out of nowhere you could just die to the ATOG.
Yeah, and that's a cool trick of when they play an ATOG on turn 2, they're usually not prioritizing it that high. So you can burn it, and you're forcing them to be like, okay, am I giving up? Like, do I want to sacrifice a land so that I can keep my ATOG, but I'm not going to be able to play much else. So a lot of the time you end up getting the ATOG. So I think having removal for the ATOG, it's a tricky thing because there are so many must deal with threats in the deck.
Yeah. Yeah. And our last bullet here is keeping the artifact count low. And this one is really tricky. And
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if I have the answer. Maybe you do. But prioritizing your removal seems really important here. Because I feel like you can't just burn all your removal on their little dinky artifacts, because they have artifact lands, which still means, on turn two, they can play a Frogmite.
Yeah.
on the later turns, if they've just got a few artifact lands, they're still going to play a Mirror Enforcer. And if you burn all of your removal trying to keep them off and you don't have enough pressure, they're just going to still play their 4/4. And now you have you're answerless.
Yeah, I think the most important thing, I'm thinking of like, so like on turn 2, they can play Chromatic Star for free because it's going to pay for that Frogmite when it comes down. So if you're thinking about casting that Spell Stutter Sprite or not, I would say go for it a lot of the time in that situation or something, because you've prevented them from casting that Frogmite, and you removed a card from the table, and you've kept their artifact count low, which I think is all playing together. That's it's tricky for sure. But if you can't keep their artifact low, just respect Galvanic Blast, and then when you go to board, take out removal that doesn't line up with their 4/4s very well.
Okay. One of the other easy ways to just beat this deck is just have silver bullets in your sideboard. Fill your sideboard with Gorilla Shamans, Ancient Grudges. If you're mono blue, play a Null. I actually think that's like a given. If you're playing mono blue Delver, you have to have, I think, at least 3 copies of Ignol in your sideboard. Otherwise, this matchup is just incredibly painful, I think. Gleeful Sabotage is another one for mono blue. Let's see, I'm trying to remember Gleeful Sabotage.
Yeah, that's the one with Conspire. It's 1 in a green.
Oh,
You target an artifact. It blows up the artifact. If you can tap 2 green creatures,
yeah.
it copies itself.
What card was I thinking of? I thought there was
it's
Steel
Sabotage.
Sabotage.
Yeah.
Yeah, the finger.
Yeah, and so
that's what I was thinking of.
So that goes along with a Null.
Right.
I think that playing a Null is always better than playing Steel Sabotage. It doesn't have that clause of you can bounce the artifact, but I think hitting those, if you're playing blue,
it can hit enchantments.
It can hit enchantments, which is huge. Yeah, and the second mode of bouncing an artifact, since most of the time their artifacts are just free anyway, you don't care.
Yeah. Well, and that's one of the things that makes mono blue so bad against this deck, is it takes advantage of the tempo from bouncing creatures with like Vapor Snag or Snap or something. Mm-hmm. And like snapping a free 4/4 doesn't feel great because they're just going to play it again. And I mean, you got a little bit of tempo because they're not going to be attacking you with that 4/4 for another turn cycle, but it's still just not the right place to be.
Yeah, and it's only worth it if that means you can get in with your ninja. But yeah, but that's narrow. Other than that, I would just say upgrade your removal. Like if you don't have access to red, let's be honest, because that's the best color to be able to hate them out. And I guess green has its ways too. Basically, if you're playing black, just go for just kill spells. Like Doomblade is so great. You can Doomblade that ATOG and it just messes with them. Journey to Nowhere is also great since it's non-conditional. So I would just say, but you don't board into Journey to Nowhere, so it's not super worth considering. But Swirling Sandstorm I mentioned before, that deals with so many of Affinity's threats. I would say that's an all-star there as well. So,
yeah.
Can you think of any other things that you'd side into? Like,
not really. Honestly, whenever I'm packing hate for Affinity, I like to just go all in on those silver bullet type cards. Just have Gorilla Shamans or Ancient Grudges, but still try to follow a game plan when you're siding against it. Think about what you want to be doing against them and think about what they're trying to do to you. Is Affinity the beatdown in this matchup? Well, that means I need to go bigger with my removal spells. Or am I the beatdown with this matchup and I need to, take a different dynamic with my sideboarding? Um, so let's talk about really quick just where this deck fits in the metagame. Um, it's one of the decks that is extremely powerful, but there are those silver bullet cards that just completely shut it off almost.
Hmm.
How does that how does that affect this deck when we're thinking in terms of how competitive it can be, how powerful it can be in a metagame?
So it's really all about the number of sideboard slots, I think. If someone comes prepared with four Ancient Grudges or four Gorilla Shamans, they're just going to have a phenomenal matchup against you. And if they don't, then they're not going to be favored. And I think that's all it comes down to is the number of sideboard slots that you have to allocate to this deck is just how much you care about your win percentage against it. You can't always have those four because the the Pauper metagame is so diverse, but like this deck can run you over if you're not prepared. So it's a balancing act. I think the more it gets popular, like it doesn't stay at number one because of that fact, but it's easily one of the most powerful decks.
Yeah, so that's probably one of the main reasons why we see this deck fluctuate in and out of favor so often, where we'll see it crush a tournament, and you can usually look in those top eights and see a relatively low amount of artifact hate. But then we look at a tournament where there's no affinity to be seen anywhere, but it's just like, well, look at the sideboards, see what those sideboards are doing, and that's probably why you didn't see any. So,
All right.
well,
Yeah, that's I think that basically covers Affinity. Just be prepared for it. And if you're playing Affinity, I think sequencing as always is key, and knowing your role of just most of the time you're beat down unless they are a super fast deck, and then you gotta remember to block.
yeah. Cool. Well, that was our main topic for the week, our deep dive in looking into Affinity and the deck. Hope you guys enjoyed that. Hopefully, it was insightful. And, if we missed anything, if there's something we felt like we should have talked about, feel free to email us. Let us know. We're always looking to improve, make our show better and more full for you guys.
Oh, I
But
have
let's,
I have one more thing to say. So I actually I was trying to prepare for this, and I wanted to say, oh, go down the list of decks and say this matchup is good, this matchup is not good, and I found it just all over the place. For every deck, I could find one person who's like, I play this deck all the time, my matchup is phenomenal, and then another guy being like, I just can't beat Affinity. What's up with that? And I think it's just because of that. Are you prepared with your sideboard? So I think the matchups are kind of crazy. Of are you favored or if you're not. Anyway, sorry.
yeah, it's probably a lot dependent on how prepared your opponent is for the matchup rather than is this matchup actually bad for me? Right?
Yeah,
Maybe.
absolutely.
Okay. Cool. All right. Now we're done with the main topic of today's show. So let's jump in really quick and look at our Popper Challenge breakdown from the past week. I'll be honest, and I think Sean shares
Mm-hmm.
my feelings, my lack of enthusiasm for this top eight. It is it doesn't look good. I'll be honest.
Problematic.
So, yeah, potentially, yes. So we're looking at first place. Tribe Combo took it down, which is actually fantastic. That's
Yeah, that's
very
great.
cool. That's like the pillar of light showing through the dark clouds of doom and death. That is this top eight. And in second place, we've got Scred Delver. In third place, we've got Scred Delver. In fourth place, we've got Tron. Um, Marasatron, Dinrovatron. I think that it had both of them in there, so I'm just calling it Tron because I don't know. No, this one had no Dinrova horror,
Okay.
so it's just Marasatron. Um, fifth place, Blue Black Alchemy. So that's kind of exciting too. We haven't seen an alchemy deck in a
So
top eight for a
I
while.
didn't look at the blue black alchemy. Do you know what kind of blue black alchemy is this? Does this run Delver and Angler, or
Uh,
is it just
no, no, it's Seagate Oracles, Gurmag Anglers, and Muldrifters as its creature base.
Muldrifter.
And that's just chuck full of removal. There's one Evankar's Justice, which I love. A bunch of Disfigures, 3, which I think is the best number. Some Doom Blades. It's got 1 Mystical Teachings and 3 Forbidden Alchemy.
Get to the card.
Moment of Craving.
Yeah, that's what I'm excited about.
Yep, I thought you would be. This card is awesome. It's a card we talked about in our set review. We think it's the best card in Pauper for this format, despite what other people think. Most people think it's the
Dusk Legion Zealot.
Yeah, I don't know. They say it's good. I think it's a worse version of Phyrexian Rager.
It is.
Like, I just feel like it being a 2/2, despite being 3 mana, is just better than a 1/1 for 2.
So is this? Did we see Moment of Craving in a top 8 before we saw Dusk Legion Zealot?
I don't think we've seen Dusk Legion Zealot appear anywhere in this format yet.
I've seen it in lobbies where people are testing it out in like mono black, but
sure,
I think we got there. I think I have been proven right, and that's what's the most important.
Self validation. We're so smart. In all honesty, we probably just got lucky with this one.
Nope. I think it's good.
Nope. We knew it. You heard it here first, people. Pauper Power Picks. Common Knowledge Podcast. Moment of Craving. Yo. But yeah, this is just going back to the deck list. This is just a really pure blue-black control deck. I love it. This is the type of deck that I would be playing if I was going to be playing this control deck. Let's keep going, trucking along though with this. We've got Burn in 6th place, and then in 7th and 8th place, 2 more copies of Skred Delver. Now, we're used to seeing 3 to 4 copies of Delver in top 8s, but last week, what did we see? We saw like 2 mono blue Delver.
I think it was like 2 Skred Delver.
2 Skred, 1 mono blue, 1 blue black. And I'm okay with that. I'm okay when we're seeing variety in our Delver lists. But seeing 4 copies of the exact same deck, probably close to the same 75 with maybe some differences in the sideboard. I haven't looked that closely yet, but I'm sure they're very similar. This maybe is putting up some red flags that maybe this deck is too powerful. But I don't know. Still a very small sample size. 1 top 8 really isn't enough data to just grab the torch and pitchfork right away.
Yeah.
But I think that we need to kind of keep an eye on this going forward.
Yeah, the deck has been going up and down out of like, is it the best deck? Oh, maybe it's not. We're adjusting. And then it just pops back up and it's like, no, maybe this is. Because it can just deal with so many things.
Yeah, and I kind of feel like a lot of it too is the Delver players adjusting themselves. You know, we get those days where someone shows up and they're like, okay, I know how to beat Skred Delver. And that's when we see it kind of slow down a bit. Still, it has consistent, strong finishes, but then it turns around and does something like this, where it's just like, wow. And I think it's the Delver players, that new technology, new innovation comes in, kind of beats them down for a minute, and then they adjust and they refocus and they say, okay, this is how I beat that matchup now. This is what I do going forward. And we see things like this happen.
Yeah, and I want to say it's not at a point of a problem, but I think let's keep our eye on it.
For sure. Yeah, like I said, I don't think we need to grab the torch and pitchfork yet.
Yeah, that's episode 13.
2 weeks. Wait 2 weeks, and then we'll be calling for the banning.
All right. So, are we ready to move on to what we are playing?
Prediction. Yeah, let's talk about a bit what we're playing. Sean.
So there's a little bit of an issue with this what are we playing as well, because there's a lot of representation of Skred Delver here as well. Brandon.
I was going to save mine for last, but okay. I'm playing Skred Delver. I want to play the best deck in the format. I want to play the deck that can win me the most matches.
Mm-hmm.
And it just so happens that that deck is also one of my favorite archetypes, Delver. My favorite deck of all time was Modern Treasure Cruise Delver. I wish that Treasure Cruise wasn't banned in Modern. No, it would have made the format terrible and awful, and everyone would have hated it except me, because I loved it. I didn't care if I was playing Treasure Cruise Mirrors all day, and I kind of feel the same way with this Scred Delver deck. I don't think that it's to a point where it's bad for the format yet, where we have this unhealthy polarized metagame of Scred Delver, what tries to beat Scred Delver yet. But I think that this deck is powerful, and really in the hands of a capable pilot, you can almost you feel unbeatable. I'm not that pilot yet. I still lose a ton with this deck, but it still feels very good.
Yeah.
It feels like looking back after a match that I've lost. When I look back on it, I can go, wow, that game was very, very winnable. Like, very in my favor if I had played it right, and I didn't. And that's what's kind of scary about the deck. You know, get it in the hands of the right player. And I don't know. This is a theory I have, and I could just be completely off base, but
You are.
moving on. I feel like, and this is one of the reasons that Modern was actually removed as a Pro Tour format for a while, is because when we get a format that incentivizes the best players to win and break the format, we see things like this, consistent results where it's one deck is half of a top 8. And part of me thinks we don't see that as much in Pauper because of the very casual nature of the format. It is competitive. Players are competitive in that they're trying to win. But a lot of players kind of try to play their own deck, and they brew and they do things like that. And I think that if we ever had a Pauper Pro Tour, like, the top 8 would probably look like this. Like,
Yeah.
I think that would be the deck that all the pros would gravitate towards, and that would sort of speed up this process of polarizing the format. And we just don't have that in Pauper, which I think is actually a very good thing.
Yeah.
But I do kind of, this does put up red flags for me, how powerful this deck is. I'm going to keep playing it until something, is Gush is banned, or something is printed that just, makes this deck worse or something. I don't know.
So now we're on to the subject of what card do you ban out of it? And I've been thinking about this all week, actually.
Okay.
What card?
I kind of just said Gush because it was the most powerful, but I don't know if it needs to be
a problem. Gush isn't a problem,
right.
and
right.
I think it's so beloved that I don't want to get rid of it. I think we want to target just Scred Delver.
Mm-hmm.
And
do we just target Scred?
Yeah.
Yeah.
1 mana to do any number of damage, really. Like, you shouldn't. It shouldn't be that easy. You shouldn't look at a Gurmag Angler and be like, "Oh, you've made a mistake, friend, playing that 7 mana spell, 1 mana spell." Like,
yeah, your 7 mana 5/5.
Yeah, I think it makes it too easy. Like, with burn, you should have to add up to get those numbers and not just have it handed to you. And I think that's part of the problem. I think Mono Blue Delver's not an issue. There's ways to deal with that
not
deck.
At all.
But I think Scred Delver it handles everything so well. It has all the answers.
Right. And Scred gives the deck a whole nother level of play. Whereas Mono Blue is very much a tempo deck and very much relies on tempo and sequencing to win its games. It is very unforgiving.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas Scred Delver is much more forgiving. You can make a play mistake and then you can recover later on because you have Scred, and you could just, okay, well, I should have dazed that creature and I didn't, but at least now I have this Scred to kill it, So you can, it's a little more forgiving, and it doesn't punish you quite as badly as Mono Blue Delver does.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
So
I think
I do.
that's.
I definitely do think Scred is probably the problem. What about ban snow-covered mountain?
I think you
Does
mean
that?
snow-covered island. The snow-covered mountains aren't causing a problem because if some other deck wanted to brew with Scred that's not
Yeah,
blue, I don't think that would be so much of a problem. But
sure.
but when it is just
Why don't we just ban Island?
because
I would quit Magic.
yeah, because people would quit Magic. They'd be like,
I
why
would
even play
send
Pauper?
Wizards of the Coast a pizza box, but there would be no pizza in it.
I think literally every deck in that top 8 has blue in it besides Burn. I guess
Yeah,
Tron doesn't have any islands, but you'd be cutting all of those out of the
Tron's a
format.
Tron's a blue deck. Let's be real.
Yeah,
I mean, Tribe isn't. I don't know. Nah, Tribe's a blue deck.
yeah, it very much is a
It
blue deck.
feels. Yeah,
It
it's
has
blue.
4 white spells in it, Brandon.
Yeah, you're right. Oh man.
Um,
Anyway, let's get off of this.
uh,
I'm done.
so
I'm
so
done with this.
okay,
This
I'm going to talk
Delver.
about what I'm playing now.
Yeah, tell us what you're playing.
So I'm still working on my brew of mono blue acid trip. I did post a video this week. I think I figured out what's wrong with it. I want to try to play Perilous Research as another way to take, what's the card? Reality Acid off the table and draw 2 cards. So I think there's a lot of. I think the deck has potential, and I'm working on it. So I think tune into my YouTube channel for more, and we can. I think we can get into our outro now, so I can pimp my YouTube channel.
Yeah, do that. But for real, I'm gonna pimp it right now a little bit. Watching you stream Mono Blue on Ray Miller's stream
Mm-hmm.
was the funniest thing I've ever seen.
It's a
I
hilarious deck.
I was just dying the whole time I'm watching this video, and I could just imagine just the sheer frustration on your opponent's face when you're like, spreading sees your thing. Acid trip my spreading seas, and they just like lose their land, and you're spreading sees your thing again, and they're just like, what is happening to me?
Yeah.
Like, if it was me, I would be screaming profanity through my keyboard at you.
It takes
If it
those
was
those
me.
bounce lands that we spent all last episode just saying how great they are and then arguing half the episode about. It just takes them
Yeah.
and just puts them in their place. It's just like, you tried to cheat the rules and this is what you get.
It was a good time. I recommend checking it out. But yeah, let's wrap it up. Let's close the show. Pull the curtain on this. Hope you guys enjoyed listening as much as we enjoy talking and hearing ourselves talk. You can find us. You can email the show. Any questions, comments, concerns?
Insults.
Probably not concerns. I don't know if I care about your concerns.
Insults I want.
Insults. Yeah, insult Sean.
Mm-hmm.
You can insult Sean.
Your best regional insults, if you will. If you want to send me something that only Australians say to people.
Oh, that would be sweet.
Yeah, common
Oh my
knowledge
gosh.
mtg
You know
at
what?
gmail.com.
Let's start doing this. So, boom. We're going to plug our email and our Patreon in one go. Subscribe to us at Patreon or become a Patreon at patreon.com/common knowledge. Anything helps. It goes a long way to helping the show. It goes a long way to helping us put more into the show to give back to you guys. But hey, if you want to have your great insults heard over the magical radio land of podcast world, become a Patreon. For as little as $1 a month, you could hear your insults to me and Sean read out
We're
loud.
going to read them on the show?
They've got to be clean.
Okay.
Got to be PG. Got to be tasteful, but creative.
Yeah, sure.
Right?
Magic insults I would also take. Any card names you can work in there. You get extra.
Yeah.
You get extra
Go
points.
wild with it, but be clean. This is a family show. It's for the children.
Oh, you can still throw the unclean ones in there, and I'll read them.
Yeah, we'll read them and we'll love them, but they won't get read on the show.
Okay.
Anyway, hey, yeah. If you have questions, you know what? I think that's something else I want to start doing. Start reading a Patreon question of the week. So if you guys have questions, subscribe to the Patreon and submit your questions, and we'll try to read one a week on every show. Really, we want to make this show as great of an experience. Yeah, a community, but also as great of an experience for you listening as it is for us recording. We really want this to be about you guys and for you guys. If it was just me and Sean, trust me, we could go through half the effort and just me and Sean could just sit at home and BS and talk about Magic and not have to put in all this work. But it's really for you, the listeners, that we're doing this. We want to give back. We want to help build the community, and we want to help make you all better at Magic. Because this is the greatest game ever made, period. Yeah. Get the tissues out. The tears are flowing.
Yeah, I'm pantomiming crying for those at home. So
you could see him pantomiming crying. Yeah. You know, if you subscribe to the
YouTube
Constructed Criticism YouTube page. Look at this. We're on a roll with the segues in our outro.
Okay, I'm ready to be done, so I'm gonna take the rest of this. Okay. Okay, so where to find us? We both have a Twitter. Brandon is B_Clark_CK. Clark is spelled with an E, as if it's Clarky. And then my Twitter is at Lobert8 on Twitter. And then my YouTube is just look for Lobert. If you look for Lobert Popper, I'm pretty much the guy that comes up. And then, yeah, patreon.com/common knowledge. We have that on there twice. Anyway, any last words before I cut us off?
Did we shout out our sponsor at the beginning of the show?
We absolutely did. Let's shout them out again. It is Pure MTGO. Thank you, Pure MTGO, for having faith in us.
We have faith in you.
See you next week.
Bye, everyone.